What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of TheLead Houston, where it's all Houston all the time. As y'all see it here, we are live, and I have a very special guest with me, Mr. Jonathan Alexander, the Texans reporter, staff reporter for the Houston Chronicle as well. You may know him from way back in the day of HBCU voice, working with Carolina, doing his thing back then. How you doing, Mr. Jonathan Alexander?
I'm good. How are you? You do your research.
I get a little research. I try, you could find those podcasts anywhere on the newsobserver.com. I try to do as much as I can, man. I do appreciate you giving us a slice of your time on this beautiful Juneteenth. I appreciate you coming in and talking to them fine folk and give us your thoughts on whatever's going to happen with the Houston Texans. So you covered the NCCU, right? North Carolina Central University, correct?
Yeah, I went there, and then like after college, I got a job like part time covering like crime in schools, and then I'd write stories about North Carolina Central sports on the side. So I did that for like a year and 2 months.
Awesome. So and then you also covered North Carolina and Duke.
Yeah, so I did news for like the first 3 years of my career, and then I was wanting to get into sports like full time, and they had saw me grinding away, doing both things. And first I did like recruiting for a year, and then the opportunity arose. A beat covering Duke came open, and I took that job. And then they had wanted to rotate all the beat writers and give them new beats just to keep things fresh. Because the other previous beat writers, we have a beat writer at the paper who covers North Carolina State, UNC, and Duke. They wanted to rotate those guys, so they switched me on North Carolina, and I did that for 2.5 years.
Awesome. So lots of North Carolina ties in here. I'm sure you're a little excited at the very least, considering that on August 14th, the former team you were covering, the Carolina Panthers, are going to be here in Houston, where we will get to see Bryce Young and CJ Strad in a joint practice. What you got set up for that day, man?
That'd be good because, I know a lot of people over there still got sources on the Carolina side. I still pay a little bit of attention to what's going on over there. And you got great storylines with CJ Strad and Bryce Young being friends and rivals at the same time. And I think the Panthers will be a team. I don't know if they'll be a great team, but I think they'll be better than they were last year. And it'll be one of the first tests the Texans have before the Lions preseason joint practice. So that'll be one of the first tests they have of the preseason to see what, in particular, this offensive line is really made of.
You're not unfamiliar with a lot of Houston Texans connections from your Carolina Panthers days. 2020, Frank Oakm was with the Carolina Panthers as an assistant defensive lines coach. He makes his way now here to Houston. Any thoughts on Frank Oakm? Do you got a relationship with him? Do you just know him by name back then? What's your thoughts on the signing?
Yeah, when I was covering the Panthers, it was like during COVID, so we didn't have a lot of opportunity to interact with a lot of the coaching staff that weren't the head coaches and the coordinators early on. So I didn't get a chance. I'm very familiar with him, of course, but didn't get a chance to meet him until the combine, when we were on the same flight heading to the combine, and we chatted a little bit about our Carolina days, some of the same people we knew. So I have chatted with him, but I didn't really know him much. I didn't know him personally when I was covering Carolina.
There's a few other names when the Texans were in search of an offensive coordinator during your time that you maybe, I don't know, rubbed shoulders, maybe talked to a few, but two offensive coordinators potentially that were going to come to the Texans. Jeff Nixon and Grant Rudinsky were both there with Carolina. Were you like, hey, I know both of these guys. What's going on with my history right now, man? What were your thoughts on both of them coming here?
So it's funny. Grant was he was kind of like a lower level coaching assistant. I did not know him, but I still I have Matt Rule's number, so I asked him about Grant, and he gave me good things. I did know Jeff Nixon very well. He got promoted to offensive coordinator during my time there after Joe Brady got fired. So, people who cover the team on a regular basis, we talk to the coordinators once a week. So I had that familiarity. I had a pretty good relationship with the coaching staff, with the main guys there. So I knew Jeff Nixon very well. And
awesome.
I think he's going to do well wherever he goes. He has a future in the NFL. He's obviously staying at Syracuse, but he has definitely has a bright future.
He had a high-powered offense at Syracuse. I'll give him that, man. You're also not familiar with some XFL, UFL guys coming over to the NFL. And during your time, not only are we going to harp on Damon Arnette, but PJ Walker going to the Carolina Panthers was back then one of the first, I would say, XFL kind of guys to come over to the NFL. He was fantastic here with the Houston Roughnecks. Now we get to see it with Damon Arnette. Go ahead and talk about the experience there between your experience covering PJ Walker and now the recent news of Damon Arnette.
Yeah, I mean, PJ Walker is one of my favorite people to cover. He was just a good dude. He didn't play much when I was there. Started some games like after I left, but just a good guy to chat with. He played a little bit actually, that final year. But with Damon Arnette, he's a guy who was very highly sought after 2020 first round pick. So obviously he has a ton of talent, but really, he made a lot of mistakes in his youth, even up until a couple years ago, and got arrested a few times. I've seen on some podcasts and some interviews that he said he's completely turned his life around and actually admitted that he was young and immature. And I think the Texans are hoping that, he makes good on his word, that he does continue to turn his life around. And the way the Texans look at things, they feel like their culture is strong enough that they can help players. But yeah, Damien is a guy who obviously has that troubled past, but is hopefully on the right track.
Recently, I don't know if you've rubbed shoulders with him, but I would say maybe a colleague. I'm not quite sure there personally what your relationship is with John McClain, but he made a tweet just yesterday. And if you want to speak on it, you can. If you don't, it's up to you. He had a tweet the other day saying, "I can't believe the Texans have lowered their standards like this. Bob McNair would be appalled." And that was his tweet talking about Damon Arnette recently signing with the Houston Texans. Do you have any thoughts on that tweet? And how do you really feel about that?
Yeah, John's a good friend. He's really looked out. But in regards to that tweet, I think it's fair to have I think it's fair to have that question, given his history and given all the allegations and charges that he's had. It's fair to wonder that. I also think that some people deserve some grace. And he said that he's turning his life around. And I think the Texans and I think anybody else, it would be fair if they decided to give him one more chance. And I think he said that he's been working towards that. So I don't blame anybody who thinks one side or the other. I think he is an interesting case given how often he's gotten in trouble. And, I think some people will say he also deserves grace.
Awesome. Okay. I was just wanting to know. I know we're not going to get too much into what was going on. I appreciate the comment section. If any of y'all have a comment or a question, for Jonathan Alexander, by all means, go ahead and ask a question, and we'll try to get as many answers in as possible. Again, super appreciative of giving us your time here. So moving on, where you did mention the offensive line, and there's obviously a whole lot of question marks when it comes to the offensive line, given how they played in 2024, now into 2025. What was your initial thoughts with the kind of obviously a blockbuster trade and getting away Laramie Tunsil. Did you have a relationship with him, and how did you feel after that trade?
Yeah, I mean, Laramie was a guy who I talked to often in the locker room. Definitely, a good guy, and talented at that. I was a little bit surprised that they traded him, but kind of learning the reason why they did. It makes sense. Obviously they have a lot of money that they have to pay players, and Laramie Tunsil, make no doubt about it, was going to want a raise next year, and they didn't feel like they could pay him, and trading him now, they could get the best trade value. And I also think part of that was they felt like they could get a replacement at left tackle in the draft, pretty high up. And obviously it didn't work out that way. They got Ariante Ursary, but they tried earlier in the draft to get a left tackle, thinking that they probably could. They tried to trade up. But I think they thought that they had a backup plan in place when they moved on from Laramie Tunsil, and they could get younger and cheaper. But yeah, it surprised me a little bit, but I understand it.
So do you believe that the intangible factor maybe is them trying to change the mentality of the offensive line? Do you think that is maybe greater than what was a talented left tackle?
Let me I'll try to be very clear or very clear with this. I don't think that the Texans felt like Laramie Tunsil was a cancer or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Texans felt like Laramie Tunsil did what he needed to do. Like, he got the job done. He worked hard at his craft, and he showed up. Having said that, I think the Texans do want to reach another level, and they do want to find Will Anderson, CJ like type workers. I don't think Laramie was that type of worker. It doesn't mean that he's not a hard worker, but he's not a relentless guy. And I don't think they traded him for that based on people I've talked to. But I think they wouldn't have traded him if he was a Will Anderson, CJ Stroud type of worker. So that's my thoughts on that situation.
We got a question here from Corey Barrett. He was asking, how is the battle between Ariante Ursary, someone you already mentioned, and Blake Fisher shaping up at the right tackle position? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, that probably is one of the positions that I don't know how it's going to go. I've written about this a couple times. Blake Fisher has gotten cooked a lot by Will Anderson. At the same time, it's like it's Will Anderson. Like, he's going to be elite this year. So you don't really know what to make it. Do you give him a pass? Do you not? I think Ariante has been solid. Obviously, he has a learning curve he has to get to, and he's still in that process. It's going to take him a little bit of time, and maybe he gets it in training camp. If I had a guess, I think Ariante eventually will win out, but this is just a guess. This is not anybody telling me this. This is based on what I saw in OTAs. I think either Ariante works out, is that right tackle, or maybe they're not pleased with both of those guys and they move Titus to right tackle and find somebody else at right guard. I think those are the most likely scenarios, unless Blake Fisher really shows some improvement, and unless Will Anderson is just that great.
Hopefully it's a little bit of both. For our sake, for the offensive line's sake, continuing on the conversation there, Titus Howard has been a guy that was singled out in a little interview from Aaron Wilson. You also had an article around him as well. Titus seems to be a presumptive leader. Is that far-fetched to say, considering his quotes and the way he's talking about this offensive line into 2025? How do you view Titus Howard going into this year compared to maybe years prior?
Yeah, we talked to Titus the same day. I went first, and then he went. I probably should have put that story out first, but no. That is what Titus is trying to do. He said that with Laramie having left, with some of the other guys like Shaq Mason being gone, he feels the need as one of the longest tenured players on this team, and definitely in the offensive line room that he needs to step up as a leader. I think he's realizing that. He also mentioned to me that he's excited about his role at right guard. Previously, he was resistant to it. He didn't like playing guard. And didn't want to. He saw himself as a tackle, but he's really embracing that role. He's gained weight to play the position and to be to try to be durable at that position. And I think he's showing those leadership traits. He's been at the facility all offseason, and I think he believes, and I could see it happen, that this could be his best season.
Everyone has a low confidence meter when it comes to this offensive line going into 2025, and maybe rightfully so, considering some of the on-paper talent that's obviously not up to par to other offensive lines around the league, especially when you view the Chicago Bears and how they attack this offseason with their O-line. How are you viewing, and I know it's just shirts and shorts, but how are you viewing this offensive line now after OTAs and minicamp?
Yeah, I think it's a work in progress. I think the talent, I think it's an interesting case study, like going from 2003 to 2024, how the offensive line dropped off significantly despite having almost the same talent. To me, I believe that points to the bad coaching from Chris Strausser, from Bobby Slowick, and not identifying where the blitzers were coming from, having Juice Scruggs and later Jarrett Patterson call out the protections. Obviously, they've switched that. CJ Strad will be calling out the protections. You got a new offensive line coach who Titus Howard said is instilling a new mindset that they want to be nasty. And I think all those things will help. I think you have guys who need to play their best football. Laken Tomlinson's on a short deal. Ed Ingram, he was traded. I think you got guys who are going to be motivated, who should play better. I don't think this offensive line is going to be elite by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think they can play better and be better. And, it's hard it's hard to be any worse than what they were last year. But I think a lot of the reason why they struggled last year is because of the coaching in the scheme they ran. It did not teams attacked them and they were not prepared.
Can you answer this? A lot of fans still question Cole Popovich being the offensive lines coach, considering he was on this staff last year as an assistant. Can you signify the differences between an assistant and an actual positional coach?
Yeah, so I think based on my understanding, Chris Strausser was the lead guy of the offensive line room. He delegated most things, but it was his room, and his assistants are only allowed to say but so much. It's not their room. They put Chris Strausser on the focus on the run blocking and had Zach Yenzer do pass blocking, and Chris Strausser oversaw everything else. It was his room. And through talking to players, I was talking to players before D'Amico even made the decision, and they were telling me that they liked Chris Strausser. They respected him. They thought he taught well. They didn't tell me that about Chris. I mean, I said Chris Strausser. I'm sorry. I meant Cole Popovich. They like Cole Popovich. I said that in another podcast, and I don't know why I keep mixing them up. But yeah, they liked Cole Popovich. They thought he taught well. They liked his mindset. Even other coaches told me like that guy carries himself with a lot of confidence. They didn't tell me that about Chris Strausser. They didn't say that they had faith in him. They didn't say he taught well. And D'Amico has said this. He believes that they needed to have fewer voices in the O-line room. And I think it's possible that too many people were talking and there was not enough focus on one thing. And I think hiring Chris Strausser, somebody that the players really believed in, and having fewer voices in one leader will certainly help them this season.
Not only Cole Popovich, but he also has can you say, trust with the center and Jake Andrews, who's been given the starting reps, it seems like, just from what we've seen in terms of who they're rolling out. Have you seen maybe a level of trust considering Cole Popovich's relationship with Jake Andrews going back to Troy University and the Patriots drafting Jake Andrews because of what Cole Popovich referred to him to? Like, is there a level of trust and probably reason why he's gotten the first team reps?
Yeah, see, I didn't even know it went back that far. So thank you for educating me on that. But yeah, I mean, you'll notice around the league with coaches, they go back to guys they're familiar with, guys who they know. You see it with just about every coach. When I covered Carolina, and I was covering Matt Rule, he'd always find a guy from Baylor and add them to his team, or a guy who played for him at Temple. Like he had a lot of those guys littered. Joe Brady, he came from the New Orleans Saints. He got a lot of guys from the Saints from his time there. So I'd assume Jake Andrews is a guy Cole Popovich really trusts and believes in. And I think that's a huge reason why he's been running with the first team. He ran with the first team a lot in minicamp, and he's done a solid job. And, I was a little bit surprised, but, he hasn't done anything to mess it up. He could end up being a starter at center. He's been getting a lot of chemistry down with CJ Strad.
We got a question here from Houston Texans United. He said yesterday, Titus Howard and Texans Jacob, which is a Twitter guy, did a stream together. Titus was saying Solomon Byrd has been a camp standout. You think he's doing good in camp so far and has a chance to make the final roster. Shout out to C. Royal, who is a Houston Texan fan that did pass away just for this previous year. His favorite player was Solomon Byrd. So I'm happy to hear a little Solomon Byrd conversation here. What you got on him, Jonathan?
I think Solomon has done a good job, showing improvement. I think it would be extremely tough for him to make this roster, though. Texans will probably keep 9 or 10 defensive linemen. I can't remember what I had on my last projection. I think I had 9. But it just depends on health. Like if some guy goes down and start the year on IR, and he continues to play really well, the Texans will find a way to stash him on the roster until that person gets back. But if everybody's healthy, then I think that's tough because you got Daniil, you got Will, Danico, Derek, Barnett, even Dylan Horton, and I feel like I'm forgetting one person.
Darrell Taylor.
Yeah, Darrell Taylor. Yeah, that's 6 defensive ends. They're not going to keep more than 6 defensive ends. I even think Dylan Horton might have trouble, but he does look a lot more muscular this camp and had a huge role on special teams. So, Solomon Byrd has to pass all those guys, and it's going to be tough. I think they'll prioritize him, make sure he's on the practice squad 100%, but I think an injury will have to happen for him to make the roster.
We're going to get into your latest article around Nick Caley and CJ Strad. And I think one of the eye-popping quotes for me, and he made me immediately think of when Bobby Slowick was fired. There was a news source that came around, and I want to know your opinion on it. But the quote from CJ Strad, I think for me, I buy into people. I really don't buy into systems. And obviously there's a whole lot longer quote there as well, too. It's just a clip there. It made me think of a rumor that came out last year when Bobby Slowick, or just this earlier in this offseason, when Bobby Slowick got fired. There was a rumor that came out that him and CJ Strad had some sort of disgruntlement even before CJ Strad was ever a Houston Texan. Do you find that to be true? If you know or don't want to say, completely up to you.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of truth to that story. I just think it was maybe overhyped a little bit. I don't think it was exactly how it went. As it was explained to me, like I don't think it was that contentious, but their relationship had deteriorated over time. I think they had difference of opinions on how the offense should work. But as you can see, both of them were being respectful in the media and in public and saying good things about each other. But, I reported this previously that behind the scenes, it was not a happy relationship. And, ultimately, DeMeco Ryans polled several players, and I think that played a huge part in why, Bobby Slowick was ultimately fired.
Understandable. We got let's go H-Town. Start talking. I only got a face to the name for you, Jonathan. We also got Texans could have 2 1,000+ yard receivers. I'm not quite sure if they get 1,000 yard plus receivers, but there was a lot of talk around Jaden Higgins and how he looked at not only rookie minicamp, but OTAs and mandatory minicamp. What was your impression of him?
Yeah, so he really reminded me of Kamari Lassiter in the sense that, it was OTAs where we were starting to say, like, oh, this guy is the truth. Like, he is not afraid of anybody. He's taking on Stephon Diggs and winning those matchups. And there was a couple of practices late in OTAs and even in minicamp where Jaden Higgins had, like, several plays. And I really see the talent in him. He's not quite Nico Collins, but, Nico Collins has this rare trait that he's a big receiver and he can move and make his body change directions. And most big receivers can't do that, but he's one of the elite at it. Like when Mike Evans compared him to Julio Jones, like that is like legit, but that is rare in big receivers. And I think Jaden Higgins has some of that. He doesn't move like a big receiver. He's not quite Nico Collins like, but I think he has a lot of potential. I think he will be wide receiver number 2 as long as he remains healthy. And I think he can make a big contribution to this team. He was looking really good against some of the Texans' better cornerbacks.
Jaylen Null was somebody that was also out on the practice field, but more just not participating. What's the latest on him?
Yeah, he's dealing with a minor soft tissue injury, and he was working out off to the side with trainers. I don't foresee it being anything long-term. The fact that he can run off to the side is a good sign, and I'd anticipate he'd be back by the beginning of training camp or early in training camp if he's not back by the beginning of it.
Then we also got to see a clip earlier today of Joe Mixon working out, no walking boot as reported before from Aaron Wilson, working out, moving, looked fine. Do you know what's the latest update on Joe Mixon?
Yeah, I've been told a while back that it was minor. I think it was likely he got some. I had heard that he was seen in a walking boot at the airport as well. I couldn't get somebody to confirm it, but I had heard that as well. But a couple of my sources said that it was minor. They'd expect Mixon back at some point during training camp, if not the beginning too. But they don't expect it to linger longer. I think Dameon Pierce might be a little bit longer of a person in getting back. And I think that is part of the reason why they signed a guy like Nick Chubb.
Overall, what is your expectations for this Houston Texans team? We've gotten into almost a little bit of everything across the board. We're not going to get too much into the defense because it just feels like this could be one of the better defenses in the NFL. The Ravens recently signed Jair Alexander. You think they got the best secondary, or do you think it resides here in H-Town?
No, I think the Texans have the best secondary. I think Jair, who's from Charlotte, like me, I think he's historically been a really good player, but I think he took a step down this past year, and hasn't been healthy. And I think he got signed, and I think the contract kind of signals where the league kind of views him. I think the Texans, without a doubt, have the best secondary. Derek Stingley is a top 2 cornerback. And he's competing with Patrick Surtain for that best. And then I think Kamari Lassiter is one of the better young corners, and I think he's going to have an even better year this year. So you add him in with Kalen Bullock, who was really good at 5 interceptions, and CJ Gardner-Johnson, who was a Super Bowl champion, who had 6. You can't help but say that this Texan team has the best secondary or one of the top 3 best secondaries. So yeah, but I do think the Texans have a better secondary than the Ravens.
We got a last one question here from Not Too Complicated. Can the O-line protect CJ Stroud, and are there any surprise O-linemen to look out for?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think it'll come down to kind of scheme and coaching, and I think that'll take care of a lot of the problems. I am a little bit concerned, though, with we don't know who's going to be out there at right tackle, and Cam Robinson struggled a little bit last year at left tackle. Perhaps being here a full offseason will help him, and perhaps Ariante Ursary, really takes a giant leap during training camp, or Blake Fisher. But I think Laken Tomlinson will be good. I think he'll be better than he was. He's been solid. He's been the guy they've trusted. I think Jake Andrews looks good, and I think Titus Howard is going to hold it down. Really, I think that was the biggest thing for the Texans last year. The interior of their O-line was so terrible last year, and I think it really had a really bad effect on CJ Stroud. And I think that'll be a lot better this year. And you can't get much worse than what happened last year. The outside is going to be interesting, and perhaps they'll try to help out those guys if they do struggle. But I think they'll be better. I think they'll protect CJ Stroud better. But I could also see some bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be a perfect season, but hopefully not worse than 52 sacks allowed. I mean, that was pretty awful.
Yeah.
So my way too early hot take, flaming hot take. I'm sipping, and I'm not just sipping on it. I'm drinking on the Kool-Aid when it comes to a lot of the Titus Howard quotes, the articles, and I just think he is the presumptive leader of this offensive line. And my hot, flaming, way too early hot take was that he's a Pro Bowler. Am I crazy?
I think it's a little bit of a hot take. I don't think that it would be impossible that he would make a Pro Bowl, but if he plays right guard, this would be his first full season playing right guard. I think it would be a little bit difficult because, to be honest with you, Pro Bowl is very much a popularity contest.
It's a name value.
Yes. So he would have to just be elite. There would have to be a campaign for him to be recognized. He would have to put some highlights out there, and then fans would really have to be posting his clips and make those go viral for him to get Pro Bowl, because it's hard if you're not a huge name. So I think it's a little bit of a hot take. But having said that, I think he could potentially have a really good year, though.
That's where I'm really going with that hot take, is I do believe he can have himself a really damn good year. You got any way too early hot takes, or maybe you just want to drop a little way too early record prediction for the Texans? What you got for us, Jonathan?
Okay, my early hot take is that Will Anderson Jr. is going to be in the top 2 for Defensive Player of the Year. That's one. I don't know, something about it. If he stays healthy, I think it's going to be scary hours for Will Anderson. So that's my hot take.
You throwing money on that, Jonathan?
Am I throwing money? No, I'm not throwing money on it, because that is, in many respects, is a popularity contest too. But True. I think will have played among the best of the defensive ends.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, that's about as much as I got for you, man. I do appreciate you hopping on. Let us know where the people can find you, all your latest news, articles, everything. Go ahead and plug your stuff.
Yeah. You can find me on all my articles on HoustonChronicle.com/sports/Texans. And of course, my X and other social medias is John M. Alexander, as you can see on the screen. And I appreciate you having me on, Harley, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in and everybody who continues to read me. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone that did hopped into the live stream. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate you again taking your time out of the day or the night to talk some Houston Texans with us. Remember, guys, as always, go Astros, go Rockets, go Texans. You have a very blessed night.